Mr. Ricardo Semler, President of Semler, as the kickoff speaker in this year's Dean's Innovative Leaders Series. This series, sponsored by the MIT Leadership Center and the Sloan School, brings to campus some of the most influential leaders from the public and private sectors who exemplify the school's motto, the school's mission, to develop principled, innovative leaders who improve the world. In light of that objective, Ricardo is a particularly appropriate kickoff speaker, as you will soon come to appreciate. We're particularly pleased and grateful that he's been able to spend an extended period of time with us this fall as a visiting lecturer. Today, we'll learn about the Semco story and about Ricardo's unique views about leadership, organizations, and employee motivation. His management philosophy of empowering employees and looking at corporate structures in new ways is a serious challenge to traditional models of the corporate pyramid. And at least in his hands, it works. His dynamic leadership spurred Semco to a 900% growth in 10 years and increased its industry ranking from 56th to 4th in machinery and #1 positions in all of the service industries in which it is active. During that time, Semco has grown from 100 employees to 3,000, with a minuscule 1% turnover rate. Ricardo was also named one of the global leaders of tomorrow by the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, and Latin American Businessman of the Year by America Economia, the Wall Street Journal's Spanish language magazine. He was named Brazil's Business Leader of the Year in both 1990 and 1992, and has been profiled by more than 250 publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and Fortune. One might suspect that he has some secret sauce, except that he has worked very hard to tell all the rest of us the secret. His first article in the Harvard Business Review, Managing Without Managers, provoked intense discussion globally, was reprinted more than 77,000 times, making it one of the most popular reprints in HBR's history. In addition, his book, Maverick, the success story behind the world's most unusual workplace, has sold over 1 million copies in 23 languages. More recently, he has written The 7-Day Weekend, showing again his gift for titles, which is already a bestseller. A recent passion of Ricardo's involves a cutting-edge school experiment based on 3 years of intensive study and visits by sociologists and educators to over 200 schools around the globe. The school and its institute, both named Lumiere, to shed light, have an ambitious goal to help redesign education for the new century. It's this sort of ambition and vision that has led to Ricardo's being recognized as one of the most innovative business leaders of his time. And we are delighted to have him with us today. Please join me in welcoming Ricardo Semler.
It's a belt pack with a switch.
And I,
This is an right on top.
colorful light.
There's a turn screen right there.
I'm going to speak from there.
Yeah, it's on.
No. Yeah.
Any hope? Gliding you to the podium.
All right. Can you hear me back there? It's like this. You know, when I think about what you go through here in the management education format and being an MBA or a Sloan and what you're going through, what you're looking at in terms of what experience you're going to get here, it reminds me of a guy that we had at the company who always took the same bus route home. And one day he gets to the bus stop, and this is Sao Paulo, which is a disaster in terms of traffic. He tries to get on the bus. the bus goes off, and he then said, well, you know, traffic's so bad, I'm going to run to the next bus stop, which he does. And he tries to get on the bus again, and again the bus is gone. To make a long story short, after some of these, he says, you know, I think I'll just walk home. And so he walks home, and when he gets there, he says to his wife, he says, Marie, you don't know what I did. I saved $1 today by running after the bus. And she said, Manuel, you're so stupid. You could have saved $22 if you'd run after a taxi. And to an extent, this is what we're doing every time we're trying to figure out what the latest cliches, what the right buzzwords are, what we're educating ourselves for, what the next cycle is like. And it's a very tiring way to do things, of course. And as we go over this as an organization, we start asking ourselves, is there another design, is there another architecture that could get us away from this? Because it's a very difficult way to do things, even though it seems like we're in control. A lot of people will say that, you know, we live in a time of enormous change, and so you need to redesign what you're doing all the time, and that people are at you from all sides. And at one point, a couple of years ago, I was speaking to a group in Canada, which was a worldwide telecom conference. And these guys are in the business of making each other obsolete every 6 months. So I said, what am I going to tell these people? And I went to the library, and I spent some time researching a company, which I told them about. And I said, look, picture this company. It was in Manchester in the UK. And this company basically is a textile mill, has looms and has an operator for every loom, has a supervisor for every 10 or 12 looms, and then a supervisor for every 10 of those, and on and on. Red brick building, a canteen. And so people are saying, so what's the point? Well, the point was that this was in 1633, this company I was describing. And that I don't know that a lot has happened in terms of the structure in which we set up our organizations from 1633 to today. Some of it has to do with speed, but speed is not of the essence when you think about the fundamental things, such as how do we deal with each other. And sure, we're able to call China within seconds, but what we're saying is very similar to what was being said in 1633. You put that together with the fact that a lot of people say that the change aspect is one that will lead to strategy changes. I've followed the automobile industry as a very interesting example over this time because, one, they're the subjects of a consolidated way of thinking, which is industry-wide emulation. And basically, these are people who are pinching off each other's executives, sending them to the same schools, going to the same trade fairs, looking at the same magazines, and using many of the same designers, which results today in a situation that if you line up here within, let's say, 50 feet from here, you line up all of the mid-sized cars that are available from the various companies. If you don't own one of those, you're going to have a heck of a time telling me which one's from Chevrolet, which one's from Ford, which one's from Peugeot. And there's something wrong with this industry-wide emulation. If you look at what that means in terms of how changes occur within the organization, the automobile industry is especially interesting. One, if you look, I was saying the class that we're now in 2 years' time, we will be 100 years since the first assembly line of Henry Ford's. You look at 100 years ago, that car was basically a metal chassis, 4 tires, 1 steering wheel, an internal combustion engine, a clutch system, could take 4 people, and did 18 miles an hour. Now 100 years, 27-point-something billion dollars of pure R&D, nothing to do with making the car fancier. 100 years later, in this world of enormous and fast change, we have a metal chassis, 4 tires, a steering wheel, an internal combustion engine, a clutch system. It takes 4 people, and the average speed in New York City last year was 17.5 miles per hour. That's net of these enormous changes. Think of other things that you do with the automobile. Think of some of the stupidest things that we do. That if we said, guys, let's break up into 10 little groups and let's take off a day of our lives to fix this, I think we could fix this in a day, which is think about one of the things that you do with the car, which is almost unnatural, which is parallel parking on the street. Think about what that exercise is. You drive past the point where you want to be. You're hoping everyone's going to stop. And then you drive diagonally backwards. I've been doing it for 25 years, and I still don't know how it's going to turn out, right? Now, you think about it. If we had a day, and we could break up into 10 groups here, could we not, by tomorrow afternoon, come up with a system where we simply swivel the 4 wheels this way, the car moves in like that, we unlock that, and we get down? Do you think it's out of the question that we could do this? And if it wasn't a day, it was 10 days, it was a week, years. But 100 years to solve that problem? Why does it take 100 years to solve that problem? Because there's something fundamental about the organization and the way the architecture is built up and the leadership is built up that makes it almost impossible for people who are in a business and who are in an industry to themselves change that industry, which is why, with very few exceptions, Bell Labs says 3%, with very few exceptions, no fundamental change occurs from within that same industry. So when you go out there, or you're already out there trying to work for these companies where you know that the chance that you're going to be able to change the industry you're in is 3%, which is not very exciting. And so what is it that's there? If you think, what are some of the other stupid things we do? Think about fuel, oil, we see this now again. Think what a silly concept that is. To today be drilling, looking in the oceans, putting in platforms, trying to pull this stuff out. It catches on fire. It's hard to keep. It's very difficult to distribute. It's in the hands of a couple of guys in Arabia. What the hell are we doing? Could it be sillier than that? And you think, well, we haven't come to anything. But we have. In 1963, Daimler-Benz in Germany had an electrical car which could do 85 kilometers per day, which would have been enough for 80% of us. 1963. In the early 70s, it was Honda in Japan who had a solution for a hybrid car. In the 80s, it was the French Renault that had a solution for an electrical car. What is it that makes it a 40-year process to get someone to change to a technology that's been solved 40 years before? It's because the people who are in this business understand carburetors. They understand clutch systems. They understand dealership networks. Once they're in place, unconsciously, and it's not an Oliver Stone conspiracy, it's not going to change on their own. They're not going to change it on their own. And so somebody from the outside will have to make this change, or something dramatic will have to happen, but the technology will probably not be developed there, even though the R&D effort is there. Take other things that we do all the time, and we're stuck every day with enormous problems in that which is probably the most stupid industry of all, and which has managed to do something tremendous, really an enormous achievement. It has finally gotten to a situation in which absolutely every one of the players loses. Before, there was always someone still winning, the shareholder or the passenger. Now there's no one left, which is the airline industry. The airline industry has perfected itself to a point where there is nothing left. The shareholders don't make money, the passengers hate it, the pilots don't like it, there's nothing left. And you think about some of the things they do, and you put together some of the things that happen on a flight, and you think of the following. I have watched, and I'm sure you've watched, I've watched, I think, about 400 presentations of what I should do with my seatbelts, where I get out, etc. You saw last night what happens. I wouldn't have the slightest idea what to do in the case of an emergency, right? I don't know if it's the oxygen mask first, whether I help the person next to me first, what do I pull, what do I push? I know nothing, but I've watched it 400 times. I should have learned something by now. The process is probably not very smart. Now think about something else. As time goes by, the airline people want you to spend more time at the airport instead of less. You now need to spend every time more at the airport. Now, can we put the two things together? I suggest this to British Airways, and it explained to me why it's impossible. But I said, look, you've got the people sitting there doing absolutely nothing at the gate. let's do something else. Why don't you've heard of scuba diving. Yeah, okay. Don't they certify the people? Let's certify the people. It's simple. It's like this. I sit there, and I'm a little British Airways person, and you come in, please. You come in for a second. I give you this thing, and you got to figure it out. I'll explain it to you a couple of times, but you do it. You put it on, you push, you pull, you do whatever you have to do. And I said, okay, now you did it. I'm going to certify you for 10 years. Is that okay? And here's your little thing. And it's going to go into my system that you're certified. And as time goes by, everyone will be certified. Or if somebody has to do this because they're flying for the very first time. You know, it's like, again, when you think about it, and you think of closing the seatbelt, how many options are there really? Again, it's somebody who hasn't been in a car in the last 20, 30 years who will have trouble. Everybody else will have figured this out. So there's something in there that says we continue doing what we always did. And that industry is not going to change on its own. So what kind of architecture, what kind of design makes it possible for this to get out of this situation? A lot of people say that it's not an issue of change per se, that it's an issue of strategy, and that people aren't thinking far enough or understanding far enough ahead what their business is. There's a guy who was here a couple of times, a guy called Frederick Fester, who's a professor at the University of Munich. And he decided to study this closer in the beginning of the 70s when the first Cray supercomputers came out. And he took one of these to the University of Munich, and he decided to study something which had very limited variables so that he could look at strategy with some control. And so he took soccer, German soccer. And he said, look, there's 11 players on each side, one ball, limited to geography. And so for 1 year, he followed the German Bundesliga. And there are 13 master games. Anyway, he followed this for a full year. And during that year, he input to the Cray supercomputer absolutely everything he could about the 11 players, about the coaches' techniques and strategies, and the weight of the ball, and humidity, and etc. Then the next year, he followed for a year. Of the 13 games, he was never right once. Not on any occasion was he right about the result of the game. And some of the bookmakers in London, 4 of these bookmakers, were right 12 out of the 13 games. So he said, there's very little that I can do here in terms of predicting what's going to happen. Anyone who's followed, I guess for about also 25 years, Garry Kasparov playing the IBM machine Deep Blue. This started, anybody who played chess 25 years ago, remember that this was a very, very simple contraption which could do 4 or 5 games, could figure out 4 or 5 moves ahead of time. Any of us, I hear from the people who understand chess, can do between 2 and 3 games ahead, because you have to move, you have to figure what the other person is going to do, and then one more, what the other person is doing, one more, and that's a lot. And Garry Kasparov can do 4 to 5. And this machine started off doing 4 to 5. So it was a good game 25 years ago, and to make a long story short, it went to 50, to 100, to 50,000, to 100,000, to 1 million, to 4 million moves that it could calculate within a minute. Not only that, but it had all of the Grandmaster games in history and all the strategies in its memory. So it finally was retired a couple years ago when in a series of 6 games, it won 3, Kasparov won 2, and there was a tie. My question, of course, is not, can you develop a computer that will hold 4 million games or moves in its memory, but how is it possible at all for someone with 4 moves to play something of 4 million moves? That's the only fundamental question. And to me, there's only one possible answer. There's only one thing that he has which the machine does not, and that is intuition. And if the only thing he has that's different is intuition, where are we putting intuition to play when we're doing our analysis and when we're looking at the corporate world and trying to figure out where these things are going to go? I once went to visit the guy in The Hague who runs the planning department for Shell. And I spent some time with him, and this was some years ago, and I said, look, the barrel of oil was $19 at the time. I said, what did you calculate that the barrel of oil would be worth at this time? And he went to get his numbers, and he said, look, our 5-year plan. He had 120-odd people in the department, banks of computers. He was doing all the geological, political, morphological study, and he said, look, here's the number, and it was something like $38. And I said, geez, that makes a small $82 billion difference for Shell. And I said, the interesting part is not that. The interesting part is, what are you doing here as planning director still? And how does this work? And two, don't you have intuition? You've been here 30 years. He said, sure, I have intuition. I said, do you keep any records? He said, yep, I keep a little notebook, which where I write down what I think the barrel was going to be. And I said, where's that? He said, I have that somewhere. He went to get it, came back, and he said, look, I said $21. And I said, well, you could have done Shell a good service if you told him that 5 years ago. And he said, imagine myself sitting there in front of a board meeting, 20-odd guys, 70 years old on average, and saying, you know, I've been sitting by the pool and talking to my dog, and so he says that doesn't work. And the reason why I'm still here is I have the right to be wrong, but I have to be precisely wrong. And that will guarantee survival, as is the case, I think, with almost all of the business plans and things that we have. If I were to take a business plan of any of the companies that you work for, and you were to give me a good 10, 15 minutes, I think I can do your 5-year plan for you. Because basically it's just an extrapolation added to wishful thinking. Have you ever seen a business plan that says, I'm going to go 5%, and then minus 14, and then minus 22, and then I'm going to recuperate a little bit, then it's going to go to hell? Because that's what happens, right? That's how it looks in practice if you look at the last 5 years. But that's not the way we design it. There's something within us that says we're willing to kid ourselves and trick everybody else into thinking we have control, as long as we do it with wishful thinking. What is that business plan useful for? It's the same reason we take on growth and other aspects as an assumption that we need to follow. The assumption that growth is good for companies is a very difficult one to sustain. I've tried on several occasions to listen to people who had done studies on growth, and there is no evidence whatsoever that companies that grow a lot do better than companies that do not grow a lot. And that's tough, because that's the parameter we all take. That's the scoreboard. We're looking at. And so much so, and it is so anthropological, that as we go around the world, people say, you know, our object here was to get to $100 million, a billion, this and that. As you go around the world, especially in Europe, when there were currencies, everybody there wanted 100 million something. It didn't matter what. When you had 100 million Swiss francs or French francs, it just turned out to be $18 million. But it doesn't matter. It was 100 million something they wanted. And why they wanted 100 million something, nobody's sure. Would they be very unhappy with 83? Probably so, because they set themselves a path. And so it is very dangerous in this respect to say, here's where I'm going. This is exactly my mission. Follow me, and I'll be sure, because you're going to go after something. But you're not sure at all whether you should have gone after that in the beginning at all. And what kind of a design will deal with that? So we've been, I guess now, about a quarter of a century asking that question ourselves. And we came up with an answer that says that we need to undo the formats that are basically legacies of military hierarchies, because the function that we have in the pyramid that we know is basically a military tradition. And much of what you do at an MBA is done at West Point. Some of it is done in boot camp. And when you look at a vice president of an area and you look at a colonel of a flank, et cetera, there are not a lot of differences. When you look at what we talk about, which is mission and strategy and flanks and so forth, our language is all very military. And this rationale is still within us to a great degree. And nowadays, I mentioned this when we were talking to Mintzberg. I was in New York last week, and I was curious because with the security issues and with me being a Brazilian, I have to take my shoes off at least 3 times every time I try to fly somewhere. And I called the guys in a chopper service on Times Square, and I said, look, what's a 15-minute ride cost? So much. Over Times Square? Yeah. And I said, geez, I can imagine, you know, it's going to take me 4 hours security measures. No, you just come right on the plane. We don't have any security. So if you want to throw a bomb on Times Square, that's no problem. But try to go to New York on a normal flight on business, then you're really in trouble. And so there is something within the system that says that is gone, that capacity. If you take 1 million people here on an active army, and you have $1 billion stealth planes, what do you do against a kid with a vial in the subway? What does it take? One kid and one vial in the subway, and you have 1 million people of the army on their knees. And that is the same thing. And we saw a glimpse of that in the corporate world in 1990, 2000 with the dot-coms, because the dot-coms instantly created havoc until finally everyone started trying to price it and trying to control it, et cetera. But for an instant there, it was very frightening because it was really somebody with a vial in their pocket. This was really guerrilla warfare or terrorist activity when 3 guys in a garage go out and do something. When you look, and you might ask Steve Ballmer, who's going to be here, and I've asked them on several occasions, it's a difficult answer for them. 20-something years ago, 3 guys in a garage got together and changed the way we communicate with ourselves, the way we understand the world, et cetera, through Windows. But dozens of thousands of engineers, terribly well chosen, terribly well paid. In the meantime, we're just able to change the color of the icons. Isn't there something wrong with that? Is there something wrong with the fact that 3 kids can design that whole thing, but for 20 years with thousands and thousands and thousands of engineers, you can do nothing to avoid this thing freezing and taking so long to warm up? And we're going to look at this sometime. It'll be like a valve television or radio, you guys remember. This is what it's like. It's a valve because it's got to warm up, it's got to load this, load your personal settings. This is 20 years and thousands of engineers trying to fix it. So there's something in the organization where once you're in it and once you're playing by the rules of the corporate game, there's something wrong with our ability to change and to make life gratifying at all. So what we did was to start with very simple why questions. And of course, as you know, anything that you apply, let's say 3 whys to in a row, is trouble. Anybody who has kids, I have a 6-year-old, for example, when he asks the first why, I always have a good answer. I say, well, because this. And then why that? I start running into trouble. And by the 3rd why, there's only one answer and one solution, which is to buy him an ice cream. And so when you say, why are we wearing suits and ties to work? People say, well, so we'll look more like each other, okay? Why do we want to look more like each other? If you say, when we want you to come, for example, here to Deborah's program and think as managers and really think about what you're doing, please don't wear suits and ties. Oh, so when we are wearing suits, we don't want to do too much thinking, right? There's something wrong with this process that we just start following. Why do we have a headquarters? Why? We say, we bring people from all over town. People go an hour and a half through mass transit. And as soon as they arrive, they send an email to a person that they can see. Do they not? The person is 10 feet away, and they send them an email. They will not get up to talk. 1, because they don't know if the person's going to ask other things. And 2, they need to copy 2 other people who are not there. So the whole assumption that you have to be there, you're working together, et cetera, may not be true anymore. And we're just following this rationale all the time. So we went through a process there of testing a lot of these whys and trying to find out why we were doing some of these things, and the answers were not good. So we undid as we went along. So basically, in a nutshell, today, it's a company that says the following. First of all, we don't know where we're going, but we'd rather not pretend that we do, because we think pretending is more dangerous than realizing that we don't. We put together a budget which is was always, as with everyone else, was a 1-year budget. And we found, of course, that all the good things were going to happen in the second half. So we said, take out the second half and tell me what you would do if you only had 6 months. And that changes dramatically the way people see things. And now they're forced to have a rolling rationale of the numbers they can really talk to, because talking on specific numbers for more than 6 months is improbable. Now, I want you to think about the future a heck of a lot, but don't write it down, please, because if you write it down, we have to follow it. It's what we have in our meetings, for example. All our meetings are on a voluntary basis. And we say, come and go as you please. Because if it's getting boring, go. Every time we have a meeting that's getting close to the end and we're starting to write down tasks and who's going to do what, people get up and leave. And so we think, who's going to be left? And if no one is left that really wants to do this, do we really need to do this? You know, when you get up on Monday morning, you say, let me weigh this. You know, it's much nicer to stay in bed, but, and you may, and in the end you decide that you'd rather stay in bed, but you will get up. This is true for the business too. If somebody thinks that customer needs something delivered or a treasury department needs something filled out, somebody thinks against their own interest, they'll do it. If no one wants to do it, maybe we have to think about whether that should be done at all. So we put together the 6-month budget, and then we say, leadership is situational. Right. We all find democracy to be a fundamental issue in our lives. We will send our sons anywhere in the world to die for it. We will not participate in a society where we can't choose our own people, elect everything from sheriffs. But I've never seen a democratic workplace. So it's very important for our life, except where we spend 60% of our time. And there must be something wrong with that. And so what we're saying is not that democracy is a value, is an ethical, ideological concept that we want to follow, but that democracy and freedom for people to set up their lives the way they want is a very efficient tool for competitiveness and for keeping alive. And so we say, we don't want you to move here when I talk about the 7-day weekend rationale. What we're saying is the following. Every one of us has learned how to send emails on Sunday night. But how many of us know how to go to the movies on Monday afternoon? If you don't know how to go to the movies from 2 to 4, you're in trouble. Because you've just taken on something which has unbalanced your life, but you haven't rebalanced it with something else. And so the Saturday and Sunday thing has long gone out the drain. The idea that you have, because the opposite to activity is not leisure, it is idleness. How much idleness is left in our lives? Not very much. You look at your weekend, it's full of, I'm going to meet the guys for this, then I'm going to do that, then we're meeting them for the movies, then we're going out to dinner. On Sunday, I'm having lunch with that. That's what it looks like, right? There's no idleness left there, just between small moments. So it is obvious that the burnout rates that we see and the general malaise that we're living through in a world that today, after 1989, what are we, 16, 17 years hence, since the Berlin Wall fell, we're in a world that we haven't figured out either, because this was supposed to be a good answer to that and a better answer to that. But 3.7 billion people are beneath the level of poverty. 3.7 out of 6 are in poverty. It ain't working that well either. You add to that a corporate world where the companies are not able to sustain themselves for very long. Every time these cycles are getting shorter. But your chance to be alive as a company in 40 years is 9.1% if you take the past. So there's a 91% chance that what you're doing is silly, that the company's not going to survive, and that the world's going to get poorer. And that's a system we wake up and devote our 7 days almost of a week to do. So as we use democracy as a tool, we say, we want you to fit this into the way you see the world. And we don't want you to do things you don't want to do. So we'll take an area, for example, where we need a leader. People have concluded that they need a leader. So we'll say, Wednesday, 2:30 p.m., such and such a room, people will get together to talk about the new leader. Whoever shows up, shows up. Now, once you're there, you say, what do we need out of this person? This person is a CFO? Yeah. What do they need to be able to do? Well, let's give them a difficult test. Let's put together all kinds of scrambled numbers and give them 40 minutes to put together a balance sheet. Let's give them a difficult cash flow and have them tell us where the problem is. Let's see where they speak languages. Let's see what they do. But forget the schooling, the background, where they were not. Our process, everybody's process of recruitment and selection in a company is basically a web chat, internet dating process. It's basically you say your company is Brad Pitt, and she says she's Angelina Jolie, and then you're going to meet in a bar. Because you're telling them that this is a great company to work for, a tremendous future. You forget to tell them that you're moving all your operations to Bangalore or to Vietnam, and that you have this enormous career for them. They're going to love it here. This is a great company to work for. And they, on the other hand, forget to tell you that they have fits of rage every so often, that they worked for 6 months at a company, but they'd rather not put that in the resume. And so we then get together for 2 or quick meetings, and then we decide to get married. We say, yes, let's get married. And then you hope it's going to work. The chances are not very big it's going to work. And so we say, no, wait a second. We'd like to get to know each other better. So for 25 years, we've been doing a couple of things. One of the things we do is that everyone who is let's say a qualified candidate, and we bring that down to about 10 people. We've gotten, obviously, as the company's gotten known, we run an average of 850 resumes per job, and that's become very complicated over the years. But then let's say there's 10, not finalists, but there's 10 people who really fit the bill. We'll ask the 10 to come in together. And then we'll bring in as many people as are interested. 2, 5, 20. The last time we did it with CO, we had 27 people interviewing. Now, if you're interested and this affects your life, show up. If not, you're giving a proxy to everyone to decide for you. We've already done the test, so these 10 people know how to put a balance sheet together in 40 minutes. So what school they went to, et cetera, is now irrelevant. They learned it because they're able to do it in 40 minutes. Now, the 10 will be together with everyone else, and the questions will go, and this will go for hours. At the end, we say, please write down the 2 people that you would keep. And the 2 people who have the most points will then go through a long process of coming back for lunch. We say, spend the whole day here. Talk to anybody you want. Go around, ask whether anything we're saying is true or not, and go through a process. And after we've done lots of this, then we finally say, should we get married or not? And then we decide to do it. And that has resulted in 25 years at an average of less than 2% a year turnover, because we're not making the mistakes are not that easy anymore. There's all kinds of opportunities to make up the mistake. So from there, we've gone to a process where people then, therefore, choose their own bosses. Every 6 months, everyone fills out a 35-item questionnaire anonymously to tell us how happy they are with their boss. They do the same thing in talking about the business unit. We have what we call a round pyramid, which is we don't have an organization chart. We don't have any job titles. We haven't had for 20 years. And what we have there is a system that's very fluid. And we say, go to the person that you respect or that you need to talk to or you think has an answer to that. Give the customer whatever title they need. If you're a trainee and they'll only talk to a director, write director. It works pretty well generally. People are able to move themselves up and down as per the customer with no big problem. And in essence, what's happening? The customer is buying a product for a price. If he gets it, it's solved, even if a trainee gave it to them. And the rest of the issues are not there. So basically, this organization chart has said, figure out who the boss needs to be. Tell us every 6 months whether you still want the same boss. And put together a program that says what you want to do. In the next 6 months, what are your objectives? And then you say, oh, but what about the shareholders who have different objectives? I don't think they have very different objectives. Think about it. When you take people and you say, okay, you 20 or you 40, what do you need as a return? People start thinking. People who are cleaners, they'll stop thinking and say, well, what would I get from a bank? A savings account or for a treasury bond, let's say you get 3-4%. And I'll say, will you give me $500 at 3 or 4% a year? And the person will say, well, no, the risk at the bank or at a T-bond is not the same as here. Oh, so you need more. And so the question is, how much more do you need? And they will turn out at the same place every single board in the world turns out, which is 8, 10, 12%, 14%. That's the only number you can find. Because anybody who's making 15, 20% is in cocaine brothels or just figured something out. And otherwise, you're going to make the same 10, 12, 9, 8. These are the only numbers that are possible. These are the numbers that they're going to come up with as well. So the process is self-structured and is self-motivated because, again, we're saying don't cross town and get out of bed to come here. We don't want to know how many hours you worked. Let's contract for something you can do, and you do it anytime you can, anyhow you can. And, of course, every 6 months, and that's why it is a free market system. It's unforgiving in some respects. You've got to latch on to somebody's payroll, meaning everybody who's in a business unit together will write down the names of the people they think they need. And if you're on that list from enough people, you have a job. Otherwise, you have to latch on to another one. And then we have 11 different ways, including royalty over top line, royalty over bottom line, task-based, and so forth, all kinds of ways in which you can get paid. And today, 1,400 people in the company units do not work for us and are there. 19 of these work for our direct competitor as well, which is an interesting experiment we've had for a long time. We've never had a problem with. But the whole system basically then says, if I take away what we know as classical structure, in which I tell you what to do, you participate to an extent, and I exchange that for a system that says, let's do what you think you need to do in a way that you'd like to do it, the net result of that is, in our case, has been 27% growth for 25 years. And during that period, Brazil has done the craziest things. We've had hyperinflation, we've had deflation, we've had great times, we had the worst of times. It hasn't made much of a difference. You look at the year by year, it basically went up 27% a year on average all this time. So there's something there that says that people on their own, developing their own solution, will come to something different. We have another couple of minutes, 8 or 10 minutes, for questions, and I wanted just to, that's part, right, Deborah? That I wanted to maybe get something that's on your mind in terms of how this, not only how this works, but if there's anything there that that's useful to yourselves or that occurs to you. So I think I can hear you if you speak out in the back there. Yeah, Tim.
The first case that I'm aware of where a factory manager tried to turn his factory over to his employees was the British textile magnate Robert Owens in about 1730s, I think, thereabouts.
Yeah, mid-18th century.
How would you compare your techniques and what you're doing to what he did back then? Eventually he moved to America and tried
To New Harmony, Indiana, yeah. And it's still there. I went to visit them a couple of years ago. New Harmony is still there in Indiana. But Owen was really a sub-product of Saint-Simon and Fourier and all these people who were really romantics, who were trying to find an adaptation of these sociological solutions to business. But yes, I think there's something that I learned there as well as from cooperatives. There are many here in the US. For example, I went to visit for some time the cooperative of the cab drivers in Denver. But there are people like the Mondragon cooperative in Spain. The Yugoslavians went through a long experience. And I think there's something to learn there. I think the problem with the very romantic notions, of course, when you give away the free market content of it, and when you say making money is ugly, which is a good part of this rationale in many of these places, which is you don't want to make too much money. I think that the whole competitive scheme of things in terms of market starts driving you backwards. And so we've always concentrated on the fact that this is a system where you should make as much as you can. And today, a good part of our people set their own salaries as well, because we give them all of the information to be able to do that. And so that free market content, I think, is different to the romantic movements of the 1800s and the 1700s. Anybody else? Yeah.
How much of the details of actually implementing the kind of organizations that are in your books?
Not there's some of it, and of course a lot of the mistakes and a lot of things that we did wrong didn't get past the editors of Time Warner and people like that. They said, no, that doesn't sell. Just take that away. But the fact is that first of all, we did a lot of things wrong that are not there. Two, I'm not sure that it's that relevant, because that's why the books are not written in a how-to fashion. It's really just an effort to plant a seed and to say, there might be a different way of doing things. But I'm not convinced at all that we've found the right or the good way to do it. So we make no effort whatsoever, haven't in these 25 years, to give out material in any format that could be useful to anyone. Much like the MBAs, right? We use the same trick, which is don't let them figure it out on their own. No, what I think we've been saying is that the ideas, the concepts are something to think about, but we don't have it down pat ourselves, and we don't want anyone thinking that this is something that can be implemented as a model, which is not. I think the only exception, there's a few Germans in my class, the only exception is Germany, where the book is called Das Semco-System. You must implement. And the book is really that way. And it's, for some reason, it became 600 pages where it was only 200 here. But the interesting part is that I don't think that it's a system or a model in that sense. We have time for one more. Yeah? You're not bored yet.
My question is, we noticed the difference between like a Western style of leadership and Eastern style of leadership. And based on like your approach, have you like experimented any of this with like any of your own situation in different styles? I don't necessarily mean to want like either one's bad or good. Just see.
Yeah, we have some partners. For example, we have a partnership, a 50-50 joint venture with Mitsubishi. So we have an idea of how Asians think of this. We don't understand it. We sincerely don't understand it. We've tried hard over all this time, and we don't have some of the same structural cultural parameters. And so the assumptions about distance and time, et cetera, are not compatible. What I think is interesting about the Asian system, which I think we've tried to emulate to an extent, is this management by omission, this actively doing nothing. And we had, 2 years ago, we had a small cocktail party where we celebrated 10 years since I'd made any decision. And that was really, I was very happy they gave me a plaque saying that. And because I'm not part of the process. I don't have an office, I don't have a secretary, I don't have a company car, I don't have a place to park. Because the process is such that we have a lot of catalysts. We have people who are trying to make this happen. And I think that what's Asian in that is this rationale of, wait a second, I don't have to decide all the time everything. And sometimes doing absolutely nothing, even about a critical decision, will end up bringing through a solution that would have not been your solution alone. And the idea that we alone can be trained and can go out there and know how to answer and will be decisive is a very dangerous rationale. We put that together with missions, and then we go do things out in the world which are very dangerous. So basically, what I wanted to do today was just to give you an idea of some of these seeds to say that we definitely don't have an answer ourselves, but that what we're insisting on doing with the military legacy and the way of repeating an analytical approach to management in a pyramidal structure, that the times of that is finished, that is anachronistic, and if it's going to take 10, 15, 20, 40 years to go away, doesn't matter, but it will be in your lifetime, it will be during your career, so watch out. Thank you very much for your time.
Just on behalf of the Sloan School and the MIT Leadership Center, I want to thank Ricardo not just for coming and doing this lunchtime talk today, but for giving all of his time for teaching a course here and for engaging in many other Sloan activities, and primarily for coming and making us rethink some of the fundamental assumptions that we have about organizations, about leadership, and about life. So thank you very much.
Thank you.